Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be looking at a really unique situation. It focuses on a young woman named Danielle who was hospitalized right before her 17th birthday. We're taking a look at excerpts from Chapter 8 of a longer piece, and actually, the chapter itself is titled A Rebirth After 17 Years.
Sure.
But this chapter focuses on 4 specific visits Danielle received while in intensive care.
Yeah. It's intriguing because these visits kind of feel like a turning point for her, even though they're happening during this medical crisis.
And that's what makes this deep dive so interesting, how these seemingly ordinary visits become extraordinary in light of what she's going through. The listener has actually provided these excerpts, so let's take a look and see what we can unpack together.
Right. I think it's always interesting to look at that human element in the mix of medical stuff like this. And the fact that we have access to Danielle's memories gives us a pretty intimate look at how powerful human connection can be, especially during times like these when you're so vulnerable.
Absolutely. So the first visit that Danielle describes is, well, it's kind of a head-scratcher. She meets a nurse who, get this, is also named Danielle. And you're not going to believe this, but they share the same birthday.
Wow. Yeah, that's definitely not something you hear every day. It's easy to dismiss it as just a random coincidence, but, when you think about it, maybe there's more to it, especially given the situation Danielle is in.
What do you mean?
Well, think about how our minds work when we're under stress or, going through something traumatic. We tend to look for patterns and meaning even when things are totally random, like our brains try to make sense of things.
So you're suggesting that this shared birthday could be like Danielle's subconscious mind trying to find a connection in all of this chaos.
Yeah, it's like grasping at something familiar in the midst of the unfamiliar. And what's interesting is that Danielle even asks her father to confirm the nurse's birthday. And she describes him as having this knowing look about it, like he accepts it without needing any explanation.
That's such a powerful detail. It speaks to how we cope with the unknown. I mean, especially when you're dealing with a serious illness. It's almost like her father is surrendering to the situation in a way, finding some kind of peace when things are totally out of his control.
Yeah, there's a certain wisdom in acknowledging what you don't know and accepting that some things just are, without needing to dissect or explain them.
It's a powerful way to look at it. It makes me even more curious to hear about the other visits Danielle recounts. Okay, so the next 2 involve individuals who couldn't actually enter her room because of hospital restrictions. Her math teacher, Mr. Lerda, and their maid, Francoise.
So even with those barriers in place, they still made an effort to connect with her.
Yeah, and they each bring such thoughtful gifts. Mr. Lerda makes this really clever nth birthday test where all the answers equal 17. And Francoise gives her a silver pen and pencil set.
That's so sweet. It's like those gifts, even though they're pretty simple, represent different parts of Danielle's life. Academics and home. It's like they're trying to bring a sense of normalcy to a situation that's anything but normal.
Right, like they're saying, we're still here even if we can't physically be by your side.
Yeah.
There's also this little detail that I found kind of funny. Danielle's mom tries to cover her up when Mr. Lerda arrives.
Yeah.
But Danielle, because of the medication, is totally oblivious to what's going on socially.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting dynamic. Like on one hand, you have this loss of control, but then on the other hand, there's this heightened awareness of your surroundings.
It really underscores how vulnerable Danielle is at this point, both physically and emotionally. Makes you think about how illness can really challenge your perception of yourself and the world around you.
It definitely gives you pause. Okay, so tell me about the third visit.
So the third visit is from Danielle's best friend, Julie, and her boyfriend, Ahmad, and they visit her together.
That's nice. This visit really makes me think about the power of touch, especially when you're in an environment like the ICU. It can feel so sterile and isolating.
Totally. She actually doesn't remember a lot about what they said or even their facial expressions. But what she does remember very clearly is the feeling of their ungloved hands holding hers.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful image. In that moment, physical touch becomes the most important form of communication, right? It goes beyond words and speaks to that deep need for comfort and reassurance.
Yeah, it's like in that moment, all the uncertainty and fear surrounding her illness just fades away, and all that's left is this pure connection.
And the fact that they chose to remove their gloves, that adds another layer to it. It's like they're consciously bridging that gap between her sterile environment and the outside world. They're choosing to be vulnerable with her.
You're right. It's a small detail,
Yeah.
but it speaks volumes about how much they care for her. Okay, so during this visit, Ahmad gives Danielle a gift. this beautiful handcrafted picture frame and jewelry box set. And it's kind of a symbol of hope for the future, isn't it?
It's a reminder of life outside the hospital, those everyday things that she has to look forward to. But, and this is where things get really interesting considering what we're talking about today, what happens next is pretty powerful.
Oh, yeah. Danielle describes being captivated by the red velvet lining of the jewelry box. She reaches out to touch it, and then...
And then she realizes that she can't feel it.
Right. The damage to her hands from the illness has taken away her sense of touch.
It's heartbreaking. It's like in that moment, the full impact of her illness hits her. It goes beyond the physical symptoms and touches something much deeper.
It really does. It makes you realize how much we take our senses for granted. How much we rely on them to connect with the world and with each other. Losing a sense, especially one as important as touch, must be so disorienting.
It's a loss that goes beyond the physical. Think about it. It can affect your sense of self, your body image, even your ability to connect with others. There's a whole field of study dedicated to sensory deprivation and the psychological impact of it.
Wow. So you think this loss of touch could be part of Danielle's rebirth?
I think it plays a big part. This experience, as difficult as it is, forces her to confront a new reality and adapt to a world that feels different now. It's like a recalibration, like stripping away the familiar and opening up new ways of understanding things.
It's almost like in losing something so fundamental, she's forced to reevaluate everything, to find new ways of connecting, both with the world and with herself.
Exactly. And it's in these moments of vulnerability, when we're stripped bare and forced to confront our limits, that real transformation can happen. That's where the rebirth starts to take shape.
It's a terrifying thought, but also kind of liberating, right? The idea that even in loss, even when facing these huge challenges, there's still potential for growth, to see the world and ourselves differently.
Yeah, it really speaks to how resilient we can be as humans. It reminds us that even when things are tough, even when we're forced into the unknown, we can adapt, we can evolve, and we can come out stronger on the other side.
And in Danielle's case, it seems like these 4 visits played a big part in that. They offered her hope, connection, and a reminder of the strength of the human spirit, even in the face of adversity. It really makes you think about how important those support systems are, right? The people around us. Danielle's story shows us how crucial that human connection is, not just for emotional support, but also for helping us see things differently and adapt when things get tough.
Oh, totally. Imagine if she hadn't had those visits, if she'd been all alone during this time. It's likely her experience, her recovery would have been totally different. Those interactions, even if they were short or, a bit unusual, they were a lifeline for her. They reminded her that she wasn't going through this alone.
And speaking of support, there's this detail from the excerpt that I thought was really touching. Danielle mentions that while her parents and siblings could visit after a few days, her Aunt Max and Uncle Gene, they were allowed to visit too, because they actually put off a trip to stay close by.
Wow. That says a lot, doesn't it?
Mm.
It shows how something like this, it doesn't just affect the immediate family, it ripples outwards, It draws in a wider circle of people.
It really shows you how connected we all are and how much they love Danielle, to put their own plans on hold, to change their lives, just to be there for her. That's pretty amazing.
It's a reminder that we're not supposed to go through hard times alone. As humans, we need connection. We need each other. Those bonds, those acts of kindness and love, that's what helps us through the rough patches.
This whole deep dive has been eye-opening. Danielle's story, even though it starts with this medical crisis, it goes beyond that, doesn't it? It makes you think about vulnerability and resilience and how powerful connection can be. What are some of the things that stood out to you?
Well, I think for me, it's those small gestures that make the biggest difference. Like that shared birthday, the thoughtful gifts, even just the warmth of a human touch. Those seemingly little things become so important when everything else feels uncertain.
Absolutely. It's like a reminder to never underestimate the power of just being there for someone.
Yeah.
Offering a listening ear, just being present. Those acts of connection, they create hope and build resilience in ways we might not even realize.
And it's not just about receiving support either. It's about giving it. Like the people who reached out to Danielle, the nurse, her teacher, her maid, her friends and family, I bet they were all changed by that experience too. Giving comfort and connection, it enriches your own life as well.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Danielle's story, it leaves us with this really powerful question. If rebirth can happen in the middle of illness and loss, what does that tell us about our own potential for growth? Even when we face challenges and setbacks in our lives.
It's a question worth thinking about. Maybe it's those moments when we're vulnerable, when we're stripped down and facing the unknown. that we discover how strong we really are. Danielle's journey reminds us that even when things are tough, hope and connection are always possible. And so is that potential for rebirth.
Thank you for joining us on this incredibly moving exploration of Danielle's experience. We hope you've come away with a deeper understanding of the power of human connection and the potential for transformation that exists within us all.